New York City Hospital on a winter morning was drenched in a cold, sterile light. Long white corridors echoed with the hurried footsteps of doctors, the sharp smell of disinfectant thick in the air, pressing down on every breath. In a small room on the third floor, Emily Carter lay motionless on the bed, her forehead dotted with sweat. At just 26, her eyes were bruised with dark circles from countless sleepless nights, her breathing ragged. At the head of the bed rested her carefully clipped job application folder, its cover already worn, lying silently like a final reminder of the last chance she had. Today was supposed to be the most important day. After years of grinding through physical jobs, Emily finally had an interview scheduled at Hale Communications, the leading media conglomerate. A stable office job was not only her dream, but also the ticket out of the endless cycle of poverty, the promise of a brighter future for her little daughter, Sophie. Yet her exhausted body betrayed her at the very moment she needed strength most. Emily tried to sit up, her trembling hand reaching for the folder, but the world spun violently, and she collapsed back onto the pillow, helpless. In the corner of the room, Sophie, just 4 years old, her blue eyes clear as glass, sat quietly on a plastic chair, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. She watched her mother in silence, her gaze filled with worry, but also something else, a fragile, innocent determination. She knew how long her mother had been waiting for this chance, knew how many nights Emily had stayed awake beside the old laptop, humming faintly, preparing. And she also knew that if her mother missed today, that dream might vanish forever. As the clock hands edged closer to 9, Sophie climbed down from her chair. She reached for the thick folder and hugged it tightly against her chest. Her tiny hands trembled, but her steps were steady. She turned to her mother and whispered, "Mommy, I'll go instead of you." Emily gasped, trying to protest, but her hoarse voice broke into nothing more than a faint murmur. Through her blurred vision, she saw her daughter standing in the doorway, small and fragile, yet with eyes burning bright. Emily's heart clenched with fear, yet at the same time a fragile spark of hope flickered to life. Outside, New York pulsed on without pause. Crowds rushed forward, skyscrapers glinted with metallic light. None of them knew that, in a quiet corner, a little girl was about to embark on an extraordinary journey, carrying in her arms her mother's dreams, despair, and love within a worn-out folder. And with that very step, the fate of 3 lives would be forever altered, unfolding into a story no one could have imagined. The grand lobby of Hale Communications gleamed with marble floors and dazzling crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling. Adults in black suits and polished leather shoes strode with purpose, phones pressed tightly to their ears, urgent conversations echoing in the air. It was a world of billion-dollar deals, of power and speed, never a place one would imagine a child to enter. Yet that morning, a 4-year-old girl with neatly tied blonde hair, a wrinkled pink dress, and a thick folder clutched to her chest, stood right in the very center of it all. Sophie tilted her head back to face the reception desk, nearly twice her height. Her tiny feet trembled, but her eyes shone with an unusual light. In a clear, serious voice, she said, "I'm here to interview in place of my mother." The words fell into the air, freezing the busy lobby. Olivia, the receptionist, froze with her hands still hovering over the keyboard. A few employees stopped mid-step, their eyes wide. A man in a tailored suit, phone pressed to his ear, stood motionless, his business partner still talking loudly on the other end, but he no longer heard a thing. The lobby was filled with hushed whispers. Leaning forward, Olivia asked softly, her voice unsteady with shock. "What's your name?" "I'm Sophie. My mom is Emily Carter. She has an interview at 9 o'clock, but she's sick. I think my mom deserves this chance." Olivia glanced quickly at her computer screen. There it was. Emily Carter, applicant for project assistant. Her heart clenched. She tapped her earpiece, speaking quickly. "Lena, tell Mr. Hale right away." "Say that. There's a special interview." Very special. On the 42nd floor, Nathan Hale closed a report and leaned back in his leather chair. At 32, he had transformed Hale Communications from a small startup into a global media empire, a name rivals spoke of with caution. For him, job interviews were merely routine. Numbers were what truly mattered. When Lena, his personal assistant, appeared at the doorway, Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Another Harvard or Stanford candidate?" "No," Lena replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Something entirely different. You should see it yourself." Nathan reluctantly adjusted his cufflinks and stepped into the elevator. But when the doors slid open on the ground floor, his stride faltered. There, in the bustling lobby, stood a tiny girl in a faded pink dress, clutching an oversized folder, her clear blue eyes locked firmly on him, unblinking. A strange stillness spread, as if the world had stopped breathing. The whispers died away, every gaze fixed on Nathan and the little girl. The infamous cold CEO was face to face with a child. Nathan walked forward, crouched down, and in a voice rarely softened asked, "You're Sophie?" "Yes," the girl nodded, her eyes glowing. "You're the boss, right? This is my mom's application. My mom is really good, but she's sick today. I think she deserves this chance." No one in the lobby dared to breathe too loudly. Olivia's heart pounded behind the desk. The other employees glanced at one another. Never before had they seen Nathan Hale cornered by a child. Nathan took the folder, the paper cover still marked with tiny fingerprints. He flipped through. Emily Carter, GPA 3.8, 2 years of excellent study, then a long blank space, followed by a string of manual labor jobs: waitress, cleaning, delivery. The last line was handwritten, shaky. "I do not ask for pity, only for a real opportunity." He looked up, his gaze meeting Sophie's. Something stirred in his chest, strange yet familiar, like a memory long forgotten had been awakened. After a few seconds of silence, Nathan turned to Lena. "Clear my schedule for 15 minutes. I'm having an interview," and in that very moment, everyone present realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. A story no one had expected, one that began with the determined footsteps of a 4-year-old girl. The small conference room on the 20th floor was silent, white light spilling down from the ceiling onto a transparent glass table. Nathan sat on one side, tall and composed, his dark blue suit perfectly pressed. Opposite him, the wide swivel chair nearly swallowed the tiny frame of Sophie. She sat upright, her short legs dangling, her little hands clutching tightly to her mother's folder. In a room accustomed to neatly dressed adult candidates, the presence of a 4-year-old seemed absurd. Yet her eyes were clear, steady, without fear, as if she fully believed in the reason she was there. Nathan opened the folder, his voice calm and deep. "Your mother was once an excellent student. 2 outstanding years at university. Why did she leave?" Sophie tilted her head and answered immediately, her voice light but firm. "Because of me. When Mom had me, Dad left. Grandma and Grandpa said she brought shame, so they kicked her out. Mom chose to keep me, even if it meant giving up school." The air grew heavy. Nathan closed the folder, his gaze lingering on the small face before him, a faint ache tightening in his chest. He asked quietly, "And since then, what has your mother done?" "Everything," Sophie replied, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Mom washed dishes, scrubbed floors, carried trays, sometimes 3 shifts in one day. At night, she opened the old computer that buzzed so loud. The screen hinge was broken. She propped it up with books. When I slept, she studied. She said if she didn't, she would forget who she used to be. Nathan fell silent. In his mind appeared the image of a young woman bent over in a dim room, the pale blue light of a broken screen casting over a tired but determined face, a sleeping child at her side. And in that moment, he saw himself years ago in the orphanage, clutching a handful of old books as if they were the only lifeline keeping him afloat. Leaning forward, his voice slower now, he asked, "Do you believe your mother could do well here? This is a global corporation. It won't be easy, I believe." Sophie nodded firmly, her eyes shining. "Mom is smart and kind. She told me communication means telling the right story to the right people. She knows how to listen, how to think of others, and she never gives up for the first time in years." Nathan felt his lips curve into a smile. That simple definition, telling the right story to the right people, echoed in his mind, sharper than any polished presentation slide. He asked softly, "What do you want for your mother?" Sophie's blue eyes glistened, her voice barely a whisper, yet striking Nathan straight in the heart. "I just want Mom to be happy. She's tired all the time, but she still smiles when I draw pictures or when we watch cartoons together. If she gets this job, she could rest a little. And on weekends, she could buy me an ice cream." She said with just that, she would be the happiest person in the world. Nathan froze. For years he had forgotten that happiness could be that simple. Not numbers, not contracts, just an ice cream on a weekend. A memory stirred. 10-year-old Nathan once dreamed only of a dinner with someone sitting beside him, asking how he was. He inhaled deeply, suppressing the swell of emotion, and then said slowly, "Sophie, you know, I've interviewed countless people in this room, but none has ever said anything as important as what you just did." Her round blue eyes widened, brimming with hope. Nathan closed the folder and turned to his assistant. "Find the hospital where Emily Carter is staying. Send flowers and a gift for her daughter, and when Emily recovers, schedule her an official interview." Olivia nodded. Sophie let out a small cheer, her radiant smile lighting her little face. Nathan looked at her and gave a slight nod. For the first time in many years, warmth filled his chest, born from a silent promise that some opportunities are not measured by degrees or experience, but by love strong enough to move even the coldest of CIO yes. Pale light filtered through the gap in the curtains, falling in long streaks across the white hospital sheets. Emily opened her eyes, her head still heavy as lead, her body drained after the fever. The thought of the most important day slipping past while she lay unable to rise pressed painfully on her chest. But when she turned her head, she froze. On the small bedside table sat a bouquet of bright yellow daisies, their gentle scent filling the room. Beside it was a cream-colored gift box tied neatly with a blue ribbon and a small, delicate card. Her trembling hand reached for the card. The careful handwriting read, "To the strongest woman I have never met." Emily's throat tightened. She opened the box. Inside were simple things, a few cookies and a carton of chocolate milk, clearly meant more for Sophie than for herself. Tears welled up. She had no idea who had sent them, but her heart ached with a strange, overwhelming gratitude. Fumbling for her phone, Emily dialed the number printed on the recruitment notice. On the other end came a gentle voice. "Hale Communications. This is Olivia." Emily tried to steady her voice, though it emerged hoarse and broken. "I'm sorry. This is Emily Carter. I think my daughter Sophie may have taken my application to your company. She's only 4 years old. She doesn't understand. Please forgive." Olivia cut her off, her tone so warm it startled Emily. "No need to apologize, Miss Carter. Your daughter did something extraordinary, and our CEO would like to meet you in person. If your health allows, he will be waiting for you this afternoon." The phone slipped onto the bed as Emily covered her face, her heart pounding wildly. Impossible. What had Sophie done? The world spun again, anxious, yet ignited by a fragile spark of hope she had thought long extinguished. That afternoon, Emily stood before the towering glass building of Hale Communications. Its mirrored walls reached into the pale blue sky, reflecting the restless tide of people below. She wore the best she owned: an old white blouse, freshly ironed, a plain black skirt, low-heeled shoes worn thin at the soles. Her blonde hair was tied neatly back, her face still marked by fatigue, but her eyes steady with resolve. Clutching the folder tightly, she took a deep breath and stepped through the revolving doors. The vast lobby nearly overwhelmed her, but Olivia appeared just in time, her warm smile a silent reassurance. "Mr. Hale is waiting for you." Emily nodded faintly and entered the elevator, her heart pounding as if it might break free from her chest. When the doors opened, she stepped into the CEO's office. Afternoon light poured through the tall windows, illuminating Manhattan spread out like a glowing canvas beyond. Behind a massive walnut desk, Nathan Hale stood tall, his presence imposing. Yet when his gaze fell on her, it softened in an unexpected way. He gave a slight nod. "Miss Carter, it's a pleasure to meet you." Emily froze, her fingers gripping the strap of her bag. I'm sorry about my daughter. She's still little. She doesn't understand." Nathan raised a hand, cutting her off with a steady, deep voice. "There's no need to apologize. Your daughter gave me the most remarkable interview of my life. In fact, she was the best introduction to you I could have asked for." The words burned in Emily's eyes, tears threatening to spill. She inhaled deeply, forcing herself to stay composed, and took a seat opposite him. In that sunlit office, across from the man the world saw as distant and unyielding, Emily realized this was the second chance she and Sophie had longed for with all their hearts. The wide room carried a solemn silence, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock and the soft golden light spilling across the table. Emily sat opposite Nathan, her fingers interlaced tightly as she struggled to steady herself while waves of emotion roared inside. This was the moment that could change everything. Nathan flipped through a few pages of her file, then closed it and set it aside, his eyes fixed directly on her. "Your records stop at your second year of university. Strong results. But then there's a blank. I want to hear from you. What happened?" Emily drew a deep breath, her gaze dropping to her hands as if to draw strength. "I thought I would graduate, take an internship, and work in a media company like I always dreamed. But that year, I found out I was pregnant. The man I trusted left. My family saw me as a disgrace. They drove me out of the house. I had to choose: abandon the baby or give up everything else. And I chose my daughter." Her voice trembled, but her words landed clear and deliberate, as if etched into the table itself. Nathan said nothing, his eyes never leaving her face. Emily continued, her voice lower now. I left school, rented a small room. By day I did whatever work I could. Washing dishes, scrubbing floors, waiting tables, delivering packages. Sometimes 3 shifts in a row. My body ached, but I still had to smile for my child. At night after Sophie slept, I opened an old laptop, the hinge broken, buzzing loud, to study on my own. I couldn't let go of my dream. No grades, no recognition, but I studied to remind myself I still had worth. The image lingered heavy in the air. A frail young mother in a cramped room, pale blue light casting over her exhausted but determined face. One hand typing, the other soothing her sleeping child. Nathan sat in silence, his own distant memory rushing back. 10-year-old Nathan in the orphanage, curled under a dim lamp, clinging to a few worn books as though they were the only lifeline keeping him afloat. He asked softly, "You never regretted it?" Emily lifted her head, her eyes glimmering. "No, I lost school, family, and a future I once pictured. But I have Sophie. She is the reason I stand. If I show her her mother never gave up, then one day she won't either." In that instant, the distance between CEO and applicant dissolved. Nathan looked at her and saw resilience not in reports or numbers, but in the heart of a mother. Slowly, he nodded, then unexpectedly shared, his voice rough, torn from a place long buried. At 10 years old, I lost both my parents in an accident. No one wanted an orphan. I grew up in a home. I built this company because I wanted to hold my own fate, not wait for anyone else to decide. But I never had what you have. The courage to choose love even when it costs you everything. Emily froze, her eyes widening. For a moment, the man before her was no longer the cold CEO in the headlines, but a soul carrying its own scars. Between them, an invisible thread seemed to draw tight. Nathan leaned forward, his voice clear. "If I give you this chance, what will you do with it?" Emily clenched her hands, her eyes burning bright. "I will work as if my whole life depends on it." Because it does. I want to prove to my daughter that her mother can. And I want to prove to myself that I never lost my worth. A long silence passed before the corner of Nathan's mouth curved into a rare smile. He nodded, and in that moment, Emily knew a door had opened, not just to a career, but to an entirely new chapter of life. The day Emily officially stepped through the glass revolving doors of Hale Communications, her heart pounded so fast it felt like it could be heard echoing in the marble-floored lobby. Above, crystal chandeliers cast a cool light that reflected off the brisk footsteps of employees in their tailored suits. Emily wore an old white blouse, freshly ironed, a simple black skirt, and worn low heels. She straightened her back, clutched her folder tightly, and told herself she deserved to be here. But within minutes, whispers reached her ears. "That's her," came a sharp murmur. "The one the CEO hired directly. No degree, no experience. He must have gone soft." Another voice answered, "Imagine a media firm hiring someone who used to clean hotel rooms. What will that do to the company's image?" Emily walked past as if she hadn't heard, but each word cut deep. When she entered the project department, the wide room was flooded with white light from glass walls, filled with the clatter of keyboards and ringing phones. Emily was placed at an empty desk in the corner. Her computer screen blinked alive, crowded with unfamiliar files, complex management software, and charts she'd never seen before. On her first day, she entered the wrong data, fumbled over formatting slides, and drew frowns from colleagues correcting her. A few cast her looks that were equal parts pity and annoyance. Emily didn't argue. She lowered her head, wrote every mistake carefully into her notebook, and promised herself she would learn. When the clock struck 6 and others left, she stayed behind. Later that night, back in her small apartment, she waited until Sophie was asleep before opening the old buzzing laptop with its broken hinge propped up by books. The weak blue glow lit her tired but determined face. She searched for tutorials, practiced each software from scratch, typed slowly, and filled pages with handwritten notes. The very next day, when the team was stuck with a corrupted presentation file, Emily quietly took the laptop and within half an hour, fixed the formatting. The team leader paused, surprised before saying a single word. "Thanks." It was the first time she heard gratitude inside that office. Day by day, silence and doubt gave way to subtle nods. A colleague asked her to double-check numbers. Another sought advice on scheduling a meeting. Emily never said much. She simply worked, letting her actions speak. The hands once roughened by dishwashing now moved swiftly over the keyboard, and the sleepless nights began to bear fruit in every report she submitted. Nathan never interfered directly, but he kept watch. In meetings, when her name came up, he often asked, how was her idea received? The room would fall silent, then grudgingly admit, Emily was contributing, and her work mattered. Once, when Sophie came down with a fever, Emily panicked, asking to leave early, afraid of reprimand. But her phone buzzed with a message, "Family first. Take care of Sophie. Work can wait." Tears blurred her vision as she read. Gradually, Emily was no longer an outsider. Thank you notes appeared on her desk, positive feedback in her inbox. In her colleagues' eyes, she was no longer the controversial exception, but a true part of the team. And quietly, Nathan continued to watch, his gaze lingering on her a little longer each time, as though silently affirming that his choice had never been wrong. The conference room on the 42nd floor blazed with bright lights. A long wooden table was covered with stacks of reports. Above it, a screen displayed cold, unyielding revenue figures. Shareholders sat stiff-backed in their dark suits, eyes sharp as blades. The air was tense from the very beginning, and Emily, invited only as an observer, felt her hands turn icy when her name was called. Mr. Donovan, an older shareholder with a gravelly but firm voice, launched the first question. "Mr. Hale, this company thrives on an image of excellence. So why have you placed a woman with no degree, no experience, a single mother who once cleaned hotel rooms, onto a flagship project? What will that do to the company's image?" Murmurs rippled around the table. Another voice cut in, harsher. "If we allow this exception, what will employees think? What will partners think? This is not the place for charity." A younger shareholder nodded, his tone icy. "I propose she be reassigned to logistics. At least then she won't damage the brand sitting at the far end." Emily's heart pounded erratically. Each word struck like a hammer, shattering the fragile confidence she had worked so hard to build. She bowed her head, clutching the folder in her hands, knowing that speaking up now would only make things worse. The room waited for a response from the head chair. Nathan sat still, fingers interlaced, his gray eyes sweeping the table with a chilling calm. Then he rose, his voice deep and unwavering, slicing through the murmurs. Hale Communications was not built solely on polished diplomas, but on the to tell real stories and bring them into the light. Emily Carter is one of those stories. The room fell silent, his words striking like iron stakes driven into the ground. "You speak of image," he continued, each syllable deliberate. But which image truly touches the heart of the public? A resume lined with degrees, or a real person who fell, stood again, and never gave up? If she can bring that spirit into her work, that is the true strength of communication. Donovan's brows furrowed. But the risk, Nathan cut him off, his eyes sharp as steel. If she fails, the responsibility is mine. But I don't believe she will. I have seen her study through the night. I have seen her rise when the entire office turned its back. How many in this room could do the same? Very few. And I choose to place my trust in that rare strength. A heavy silence followed. Some shareholders averted Nathan's gaze. Others looked at Emily with unreadable expressions. No one voiced another objection. Emily lifted her head, her eyes brimming with tears. For the first time, someone had not only given her an opportunity, but stood to defend her before an entire board of power. In that moment, she knew she was no longer alone. The international partnership meeting that afternoon had been prepared for weeks. The main conference room gleamed brightly, the large screen displaying the logos of both corporations, thick binders neatly lined up on the table. Across the table sat stern-faced representatives, their eyes sharp with expectation. But only minutes before the session was to begin, a chilling piece of news spread. The official interpreter had met with an emergency and could not attend. A tense silence fell across the room. Directors exchanged uneasy glances, and a few shareholders whispered with thinly veiled sarcasm, as if convinced that this was the moment Nathan's gamble would finally collapse. Without an interpreter, the entire plan could unravel, and a multi-million-dollar deal might dissolve over a barrier of language. At the far end of the table, Emily's heart raced. She remembered countless nights with her old laptop, replaying language videos, murmuring words under her breath, filling the margins of worn notebooks with vocabulary. She had never imagined that her hobby of self-study might become a lifeline in a moment like this. Her throat was dry, but then she heard her own voice break the silence. Please allow me to try to bridge the gap. The room turned toward her. Skeptical eyes bore down. A few scoffs escaped. But Nathan's gaze locked onto hers, steady and unwavering. After a beat, he gave a slight nod. Emily rose and walked to the front, her hand trembling slightly, though her eyes shone with resolve. She began with simple greetings, then carefully laid out the purpose of the meeting. Rather than forcing word-for-word translation, she focused on conveying meaning, breaking down complex terms into relatable examples, using familiar images to help the partners visualize. When points were unclear, she rephrased with numbers, charts, even comparisons to successful American campaigns. At first, the air remained taut, but gradually the partners' expressions softened. Nods began to appear. They posed difficult questions, and Emily listened intently, responding not with rigid translation, but by connecting ideas, weaving clarity between the two sides. She turned language into a bridge, allowing both parties to find common ground. 2 hours passed. When the meeting concluded, the lead representative rose, shook Nathan's hand, then turned to Emily, smiling as he bowed in thanks. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, suddenly, applause broke out, scattered at first, then spreading around the table. Those who had doubted her now looked at Emily with something entirely different. Not pity, but respect. Emily sat down, her heart hammering, her hands still trembling. Yet in that moment, she knew she had achieved the impossible, transforming a fragile foothold into solid ground. From the head of the table, Nathan watched her, the corner of his mouth lifting ever so slightly. That fleeting smile, brief but real, was the clearest recognition she could have hoped for. And within Emily, a new fire ignited. She was no longer someone begging for a chance. She had just proven she deserved her place here. After the partnership meeting, the atmosphere in the office shifted noticeably. Emily was no longer the subject of whispers and doubt. She was the woman who had saved an important project with quick thinking and courage. Colleagues who once glanced at her with pity now came forward willingly, handing over reports to review, asking her opinion on handling data. In meetings, when Emily spoke, the room no longer fell into awkward silence but leaned in with attention. One time, a seemingly simple suggestion from her, to tell stories from the customer's real-life experiences instead of loud advertising, left the entire group quiet for a moment before the team leader tapped his pen on the table and smiled. "That's exactly the direction we need." Emily sat there, her heart racing, and in that instant, she felt she truly belonged. At home, Sophie was the one who sensed the change most clearly. Every afternoon when her mother picked her up, the little girl beamed with excitement, chattering, "Mom, did you get praised today? Did Mr. Nathan see it?" Emily laughed and brushed her daughter's soft hair, though in her heart she still carried the fleeting smile Nathan had given her that day, glowing like a small lantern. Nathan also began to appear more often in everyday moments. One afternoon, when Emily arrived at Sophie's preschool, she saw him already there, his dark suit standing out amid the sea of children. Sophie ran toward him, squealing with delight as he bent down to lift her high into the air. Emily paused, stunned, the scene stirring something both strange and tender deep inside. As she approached, Nathan explained gently, "I was passing by, remembered it was dismissal time, thought I might give you a hand." Emily nodded her thanks, but her eyes lingered on Sophie clinging to his neck, babbling about her little stories. From then on, Nathan's presence in the lives of mother and daughter became familiar. Some days he would stop by Emily's desk, leaving a small pastry box with the words, "For Sophie." Other days, the three of them sat together in a corner ice cream shop, Sophie grinning ear to ear over a vanilla cone, while Nathan listened intently to her chatter, his focus rare and undivided. Across the table, Emily watched, and a long-lost sense of peace swelled within her. At the office, Emily grew more and more recognized. Requests for help, respectful glances, appreciative notes. Each small act proved she was no longer an exception, but an essential part of the team. And for Sophie, the change was even clearer. She began calling Nathan by a nickname she invented herself, Uncle Best Friend. Nathan would feign a frown each time, but his eyes always warmed with a gentleness no words could match. One evening, as the three of them sat on the sofa watching cartoons, Sophie nestled between them, one arm around her mother, the other looped around Nathan's neck, murmuring sleepily, "I have both now." Emily sat still, her eyes glistening, realizing with a rush of emotion that what her heart had long yearned for was no longer a distant dream. A home was here, within reach. Nathan, though still carrying the exterior of a cold CEO, found his gaze softening whenever he looked at Emily and Sophie together, as if a void that had lived in him for years was finally being filled. And Emily, though still cautious, could not deny it. An invisible thread was binding the three of them closer each day, not through promises, but through presence. Late at night, the small apartment was bathed in the soft golden glow of a desk lamp. Outside, the city still blazed with light, the hum of traffic pulsing like a steady heartbeat. Emily sat at the table, gathering stacks of documents, her shoulders heavy after a long day. On the rug, Sophie lay clutching her worn teddy bear, her blue eyes glimmering beneath the lamp's glow. She turned slightly, hesitant. "Mommy, can I ask you something?" Emily managed a tired smile, glancing back. "What is it, sweetheart?" Sophie hugged her bear tighter, her voice small but clear. "Can I call Mr. Nathan Daddy?" The question crashed into the quiet room like a thunderclap. Emily froze, her smile vanishing, her fingers gripping the edge of the papers until they crumpled. Her heart staggered, torn between pain and fear. She knew how much Sophie adored Nathan, how every moment he appeared lit her daughter's face with joy. But she also knew the cost of hope. If Nathan were to leave, the wound in Sophie's heart would be deeper than anything a child should endure. She shook her head gently, her voice trembling. "Sophie, you know Mr. Nathan is very busy. He isn't—" Her words faltered, strangled in her throat, because Sophie's eyes were shining at her, full of pure, unquestioning trust, making Emily feel as though she was betraying a fragile dream. The door creaked open. Nathan was standing there, tall and silent in the frame, his gray eyes softened in a way Emily had never seen. He had heard everything. He stepped inside, his voice deep and steady, yet warm. "You can." Emily spun around, eyes wide, her chest tightening. Sophie blinked, stunned, then let out a small cheer as her teddy bear slipped from her arms. Nathan knelt down to meet her gaze and said gently, "If you want to call me Daddy, that would make me very happy. Because I'm not going anywhere. I choose to stay." Emily pressed her hand to her mouth as tears spilled freely. All the fears she had carried shattered in an instant. No grand promises were needed. Just those two simple words, "stay," were enough to fill every empty space in her heart. Sophie threw her arms around Nathan's neck, her laughter ringing bright and clear, chasing away every shadow. Nathan held her close, his eyes softer than they had ever been. Emily watched them, tears streaming down her cheeks. But these were tears of trust, of peace. In that small apartment, three people who once thought loneliness was their only fate had found one another. A family, without documents, without titles, bound only by a quiet vow. "I'm not going anywhere." A year passed so quickly that sometimes Emily could hardly believe how far she had come. The once dim apartment now felt brighter, its walls covered with colorful drawings Sophie brought home from kindergarten, the desk stacked with books and project files. On a wooden shelf, a brand new laptop, Nathan's gift for the future, stood beside the old broken one with its snapped hinge, which Emily kept as a relic of all those sleepless nights she had refused to give up. At Hale Communications, Emily was no longer the inexperienced employee whispered about in hallways. She had become a project leader, guiding her team with quiet persistence and a fresh perspective. Campaigns she proposed, centered on real stories of ordinary people, resonated strongly, bringing in both revenue and public goodwill. Colleagues who once doubted her now sought her advice. Emily still worked silently and humbly, but everyone knew she had become one of the company's cornerstones. Sophie had grown too. At 5, she was taller, her hair longer, her blue eyes still clear, but now paired with a brighter, more confident smile. Each morning, Nathan often stopped by to take mother and daughter to school and work. To her friends, Sophie no longer introduced him as Uncle Best Friend, but as Dad Nathan. Emily blushed every time she heard it, though her heart swelled with warmth that nearly overwhelmed her. On Christmas Eve, The Grand Hotel in Midtown Manhattan sparkled for Hale Communications' year-end gala. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the sound of piano filling the air as employees and shareholders mingled in formal celebration. Emily wore a simple emerald green dress. Sophie twirled in bright red, her eyes shining like stars. Nathan strode confidently to the podium, but his gaze softened when it fell upon the two of them. His deep voice carried warmly across the hushed hall. Each year, we speak of revenue and numbers. But tonight, I want to tell a story. The room went utterly silent. He paused, then continued, his tone heavy with memory. A year ago, a little girl in a pink dress walked into this very lobby, carrying a folder bigger than herself. She said her mother was too sick to attend the interview, so she came in her place. And that day, I met Emily Carter. Every eye turned toward her. Emily froze, her chest tight, while Sophie giggled softly and squeezed her mother's hand. Nathan went on, his voice rough with emotion. That day I realized courage isn't only found in boardrooms or billion-dollar deals. Courage is also in the eyes of a child who believes her mother deserves a chance, and in the heart of a woman who never gave up. Emily has not only become one of Hale Communications' finest employees, she has become living proof that resilience and love can change a destiny. Thunderous applause erupted, filling the hall. Emily blinked back tears, her vision blurring under the crystal lights. Sophie tilted her face up and whispered proudly, "Mommy, you're the best." Nathan stepped down from the podium, walking directly toward them. He took Sophie's small hand, then placed his other hand gently on Emily's shoulder, his gaze sweeping the crowd. Tonight, I don't just want to introduce an employee. I want to introduce my family. In that moment, surrounded by music and applause, Emily felt the world spin in pure joy. Years of loneliness, of near collapse, had all led here, to the moment she was recognized not only as a single mother who survived, but as a strong woman, an outstanding professional, and a cherished part of the home she had once never dared to dream of. A year ago, the hospital room was damp and cold, filled only with the steady beeping of a heart monitor. Emily lay there exhausted, her job application folder resting silently on the table like a dream that would never come true. In the corner, little Sophie clutched her teddy bear, her eyes brimming with worry yet glowing with resolve, then stepped toward the door with a bold decision that would change both their lives forever. A year later, beneath the glittering lights of Hale Communications' Grand Hall, Emily stood in the midst of thunderous applause. Sophie cheered, gripping her mother's hand tightly, while Nathan declared before everyone, "This is my family." The distance from that bleak hospital room to this triumphant moment was not bridged by miracles, but by small steps of resilience, by countless nights of study beside an old broken laptop, and by Sophie's smiles that gave her strength. This story reminds us, family is not only where we are born, but where we choose to love and remain. Success is not measured solely by titles or numbers on a report, but by the courage to rise after every fall, and by a love strong enough to pull us out of despair. In the eyes of a child, even a weary mother is still a hero. And in the eyes of a man who once thought he was destined for nothing but cold solitude, that mother and daughter became his home. Emily held Sophie close, her heart surging, not with fear anymore, but with peace. The sneers and judgmental stares of her first days were now far behind. Before her lay a new journey, one where work, love, and family intertwined as one. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to ask yourself, how many times in your life did it feel like there were no more chances, until one hand, One small spark of faith helped you rise again. Share in the comments the moment that moved you most. Send this story to someone you want to give hope to. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to join us on the journeys ahead. Who knows? Maybe you will be the Sophie in someone's life, the one who brings them faith at exactly the right moment.